Hi, this is Tamsen Granger.
And this is Dan Abuhoff.
With Tamsen and Dan read the paper on Sunday, March 22nd, 2020. A day we probably won't forget.
Well,
from a month we won't forget.
This period we won't forget. We're hunkering down. We're in the hunkering down mode that has been imposed by the coronavirus.
But before we go further on the coronavirus, I just want to think a little bit about your mom, Fleur Abuhoff.
Well, the anniversary of her birth would be March 24th. She would be, if she were still with us, 94 on March 24th.
So glad she's not going through this.
Yeah, I can't imagine how my parents would have coped with this.
But we do miss them.
Yes.
And
we're fortunate. We're out here in the country, honestly. And so we're having as relatively undisturbed time as you can have with respect to the coronavirus. We have plenty of room. We have a nice place to be, and we have wide open spaces. We're able to take long walks in beautiful surroundings every day. And I do think we benefit from that, don't you?
Right.
It's like a mental health thing, but it's good exercise, and it's very nice.
Spending a lot of time together.
Yes, not enough time as far as I'm concerned. As far as I'm concerned, but you hear news reports about lockdowns and people being told to stay within their homes, but the truth is, it never is that way. I mean, when you look at all the measures taken, certainly in New York, New Jersey, whatever. And frankly, even in Milan, then when they go into lockdown, they always say, but get outside and take a long walk if you like and if you can. It's a beneficial thing to do. Keep your social distancing.
Right.
But they don't mean by lockdown, stay within the four walls of your apartment or your house or something.
You gotta believe. You gotta believe. I'm not a doctor.
Yeah.
But you gotta believe that in most places, fresh air is always beneficial.
Sure. I mean,
so you would think you need to do that.
I mean, it is, the whole thing is peculiar. We're not going to spend a lot of time on coronavirus, but on the other hand...
Well, we actually are.
Well, you can't ignore it. I mean, because it just affects what we're doing. It affects what everybody else is doing. And the truth of the matter is, there's some peculiar behavior out there, but, people are either being overly concerned or not concerned enough. We'll never know. We'll know 6 months from now whether people were overly cautious or not cautious enough. Nobody knows is the short answer to the question. And there's just no answer. But what is odd to see things like panic buying in the supermarkets, which we all observed the first day, where every market said they were out of toilet paper. It didn't make any sense. And out of a lot of things, why would you worry about that? They were out of milk. They were out of water. Like a survivalist thing. And I did read an article in the paper in which they asked someone who was in the milk business, why do you think they're out of milk? And the person said, because it's something you can control. People can control shopping for goods, shopping for supermarkets, and it gives them a sense that they're in control of the situation.
That they're doing something.
They brought home the provisions.
But, we must have reported 2 or 3 times on this podcast about how nobody drinks milk anymore.
All right.
So what the heck are they doing with it?
Because it turns out they can freeze it. So they can freeze it and not drink it then. I mean, we're actually going to talk later about dairy restaurants. I should say also at the outset, we're going to talk later about Stephen Sondheim because it's his birthday. What is his birthday, by the way? What day is it?
I thought it was today. I thought it was the 22nd.
22nd, yeah.
I could be wrong.
Well, you've been wrong. You told me that the spring equinox...
the vernal equinox
was the 19th, and you were correct about that. But
it starts the first full day.
And I said,
is Friday.
I said, gee, that's odd because it's always the 20th or 21st. And you said, oh no, it moves around with the movement of the planets and the moon and whatever. Turns out the last time was March 19th, was over 100 years ago. But your memory's better than mine, I guess. But in any event,
my grandmother's birthday.
Yeah.
Was March 21st.
Yeah.
And so I sort of always think about her birthday as, one of the first days of spring.
Well, I know that because Mike Francesa's birthday is March 20th, and he swears he was born on the first day of spring. So there's a lot of people.
He might have been born on the first day of spring. His year might have been that way.
I'm sure it was. So, but this thing of this, going back to panic buying, I mean, you know what's even crazier than buying the milk and buying the toilet paper? There was a run.
First of all, let me just put this out as a public announcement.
Yeah.
That my mother says, as long as you have some old phone books, you're okay in the toilet paper department. Well, and should you have an old Sears and Roebuck catalog, even better. Even better. Apparently, they used to keep those in the outhouse for usage.
See, this is why it's good to live in a big city, because those phone books are thick. There are a lot of pages, and you're all set for a long time.
I mentioned this to Zeke, who's out in California, where supplies are dwindling, and he said, "We don't have any phone books." And I said, "Well,
that time
hang out with some older people."
That reminds us when we were in St. Thomas years ago, and Granger was 3 or 4 years old, or maybe 5.
No, he was like 2.
Oh, really? And we said, "Do you have like a little booster seat you could sit in?" And they said, "No." And so that's okay, you can get a phone book. And they looked at us oddly, say, "How's a phone book going to help?" And we insisted, "No, phone book will be fine. He can sit on the phone book." They bring the phone book, and the phone book is like 4 pages long. It's St. Thomas. So he's sitting there.
It did not really boost him up.
They were right. Those people in St. Thomas knew their phone books. But we're also, what's even, in my mind, stronger evidence of crazy behavior besides buying milk and toilet paper is there was a run in New York on $100 bills. There's a Bank of America branch in Midtown Manhattan. And they ran out of $100. People wanted $100 bills. And the same idea. It gave them some sense of control. I don't think they felt that $100 bills would be a great thing to have if it truly was Armageddon. But the idea that they were able to go home with several $100 bills made them feel better about it, and they ran out of them. So
do you think that's related to this is the apocalypse or the stock market decline?
No, it's just psychological. It just makes people feel...
No foundation in anything.
They feel they have some cash. They're all set.
Okay.
Who can change a $100 bill? I mean, but it's just...
I know. I'm nervous when I get a 50 out of the machine. Exactly. What am I going to do with this?
Exactly right.
I got to buy something really big.
Right. So now that you can buy a cup of coffee with a $100 bill, it's good luck.
Oh, yeah.
So in any event, gyms are closed. Here's a public service announcement. Gyms are closed. What are you going to do in terms of exercising on your own? Do you have any equipment?
I figure you're just home free. If you can't go to the gym,
you get a pass.
You're right.
It's you would think that, yes, but no.
Although I did take a live streamed yoga Pilates class the other day,
and it turns out they're keeping that. You can take that class.
They
want.
recorded it, and you can
do that again and again.
But the live aspect was fun.
Yeah. Well, okay. You can do that again, and they have more live classes. You'll want to look into that. But so we do a fair bit of working out, and I actually have a fair bit of equipment, so I have a little bit of experience about this. The hardest thing to do in terms of working out at home with your own equipment is to get cardiovascular training. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, it's easy to buy weights, it's easy to buy weight benches, it's easy to buy all kinds of things.
A lot of people have treadmills, don't they?
Yes, but the hardest thing to achieve is keep your heart rate up.
On the TV, everybody has the bicycles.
Right, and those are not nearly as good as a rowing machine.
Now, that would be real panic buying.
No.
You go out and buy a rowing machine.
A rowing machine. The Wall Street Journal. Don't take my word. Don't take my word for it. An article this week or this weekend in the Wall Street Journal. The rowing machine is the piece of equipment that you need.
I know.
Talk about panic buying.
One of those articles every 10 minutes, and yet it is most often cited as the one thing that everybody just never uses.
Well,
they buy and they push it under their bed or they hang their clothes on it or whatever.
When the Wall Street Journal recommends something, it is an objet d'art. So they have a range of rowing machines here. And I had never heard of these brands. There's something called Echelon Row with Nordic Track I have heard of. Hydro and Ergata. Ergata is a $2,000 rowing machine.
Oh, Ergata. It's like regatta.
Yeah.
But it's Ergata.
Exactly right.
How clever.
And it's beautiful. It's got a wooden track. It stands up in a way that takes up practically no room at all. I'm showing Tamsen the picture. You'd want this in your living room, even if you didn't row. And these other machines...
Knowing you would want it in the bedroom.
Yes. They have all kinds of fancy designs. And you can look up the Wall Street Journal and pull down one of these machines if you want. But I am telling you right now, the rowing machine to get for our listeners, special offer, is the Concept 2. The original rowing machine, the best rowing machine, and I'll be even more specific, the Model D. And the Model D is fantastic. It is the real deal. It costs $900, which I know is not nothing, but is much cheaper than anything they have in the Wall Street Journal. And it is a great machine. So for those interested, I'm not going to push it. I'm done with the subject.
So it has all kind of computer stuff?
It has, but that's not why I'm recommending it.
Well, then why are you recommending it?
Because it's a great workout. You could take the batteries out, and I do that sometimes. You can take the batteries out. Doesn't make any difference. You just sit there and row, and you'll get a fantastic workout. And if you're worried about your form or anything, obviously you can pull up, no surprise, anything on YouTube on Concept 2. They have all kinds of demonstrations. Concept 2 is a website. What?
The most boring workout ever.
It is not. It's fascinating because there are so many moving pieces and so many ways you can make adjustments to your form. But I know you'd like to dwell on that, but I want to move on to the next subject. Just briefly, which is...
Because nobody can row for long.
Yeah. The movie theaters, movie theaters are distressed. They're closed. They've been in tough times. There's some question about whether they're going to reopen.
There's no way they can survive this.
Well, maybe they can't. I don't know. But what is interesting is that some, everyone's running to Netflix naturally, and we are too. But
that's my question. Is the internet going to break?
Well, there is a question about that. And should we recommend the movie that we saw that we thought was good? 2007 movie called Zodiac, about the Zodiac killer. Apropos of nothing. It's just a really interesting movie with Mark Ruffalo.
Might as well. You just did.
Thank you. But you're going to see some first line movies available. And what do I mean by that? I mean, first and foremost, Emma, The Invisible Man, The Hunt. All these were just in theaters, and now Onward. And they are available online now. It costs a little bit. It's not free. It's $20 for 48 hours. But even so, you wouldn't think it's available online. Onward, frankly, is going to be available streaming Disney Plus for no money in just 2 or 3 weeks.
If you have Disney
If you have Disney Plus, which we do. Which is a mixed blessing.
No, we have people who have it.
We have people who have it, and how many times can you watch Cinderella? So it's fair, but it has that movie. But in any event, keep your eye out. There are some first-run movies. All right, so let's get to a higher tone here. Let's get to the museum update. That's what people want. You have to say ding, 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 ding,
ding, ding, ding.
Right.
Museum update.
Yes.
Well, here's the deal.
Yeah.
My career is in a shambles.
Mm-hmm.
Because...
Not as a podcaster. You're just starting as a podcaster.
Well, I teach art history.
Yes, that career.
The
old career.
Face to face.
Yes.
Only my schools are closed, so there's no face-to-face, and everything has been switched online.
Right.
Fortunately for us,
yes,
our tech staff, in other words, Granger and Nico, have returned from Bogota just in the nick of time to help me out with this transition in putting my whole course online. Now, I work online a lot, but now it's going to be exclusively. So that's kind of mind-numbing for me.
All right. But looking on the bright side...
I have assigned every term since I started teaching a museum paper.
Right.
And museums are closed.
All right.
So that's an issue.
Okay.
I don't know quite what to do about that yet because, of course, as I always like to say, everything I show my students on the screen, it's not art.
Well, the museums will be open soon enough.
Maybe not soon enough for people to do a paper, though.
Well,
so
that may be
I'm going to have to switch gears. But meanwhile, because museums have closed, they are losing scads of money.
Well, you know why that is.
Headline in the New York Times.
They're all fixed costs.
Met Museum is preparing for a $100 million loss.
Okay, I'm not concerned about that.
Well, they don't see getting back up to speed till July.
That might be, but David Geffen's going to write them a check for $500 million. I mean, isn't that what's going to happen? Isn't some huge donor just going to come through?
All right, but the point is...
Yes, what's the point?
That this is the canary in the coal mine for other museums.
Well, that's true. The small museums.
Okay? We have smaller museums that just aren't going to be able to weather the storm.
Do all the small museums charge money? Does the Frick charge money?
Not necessarily, but I think a lot of the small ones do. I don't know what you mean by small museum.
Does the Frick charge money?
The Frick does charge money. Okay.
Morgan Library?
You know what? Those big time places, I mean, they have endowments. Okay. And they have their own board that maybe can come through.
Right.
All right. It's going to be a huge impact. But we're talking about like the Tenement Museum on Manhattan's Lower East Side. It has an endowment, but really relies on earned revenue for 75% of its operating costs. Okay, so if it can't earn any revenue, that's a big deal.
Right.
So they're not sure whether they can make it. They've already laid off 13 employees, which is about 20%. So this, as we know, it's this whole coronavirus thing is going to impact.
It's going to be a few weeks.
Many businesses. Right. It's going to probably be a bigger impact for those smaller businesses than for the larger ones.
Right.
So anyway, back to me.
Right.
However, the big article, still on museums, in the New York Times Arts and Leisure section, titled "For Big Museums, It's Time to Change," written by the art critic Holland Cotter, Cotter. And it's really kind of saying that, these museums, like the Met, like the Fine Arts Museum in Boston, are going to go through a huge impact. And if they're going to survive, they're going to have to change in many ways.
And this is
fiscally.
This is irrespective of the coronavirus, isn't it? Isn't it apart from that?
Yeah, but he's sort of like seizing the opportunity of if you're going to
taking advantage of the crisis,
right? Okay. And I don't know. In the middle of it is actually supporting the notion of, to a large extent, art historians have always had it wrong. To supporting this idea, he mentions that earlier this year, Yale University's History of Art department eliminated a revered, but in the department's view, antiquated undergraduate survey course called Introduction to Art History, Renaissance to the Present.
That's sort of what you teach.
That is exactly what I teach.
Well,
so let's just say, I'm never going to work for Yale, apparently. Not everybody was thrilled by this news. All right, so Yale's no longer teaching, Renaissance, a survey course of Renaissance art from the European perspective. Not everybody agreed. There was one response in Commentary Magazine. The headline was, Yale's art department commits suicide.
So what does this mean? It's a step away from Euro-centric art to a broader environment? Is that what they're doing?
Right. Well, the idea was that it's an introductory art history course. Yeah. All right. And since it's limited to Western European and American, it gives the impression that's all the art worth taking seriously.
You can't tell people at the beginning there's other art besides, but this is what we're teaching today?
Right. Why not just broaden your offerings? Well, people still want to understand this art.
Well, isn't this the art history course everybody was brought up on?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
But it is a limited view.
Oh, no,
I don't teach it saying or even thinking that this is the only art worth understanding.
You can have other courses.
Right.
You could offer this one on Friday morning and you offer your other courses on Thursday, 3 o'clock, more prime time. You can do a lot of things. But why would you cancel the course?
Because undue, reverence was attached to these works.
Well, that's the problem.
I got to say, I'm more in favor of trying to broaden the view. This is, in some ways, nonsense. I understand museums look like palaces for wealthy people, all right? And they were built, we've talked about this before, they were originally built not even with, the great unwashed in mind, not even for, and as an opportunity for everybody to share in the art. They originally built so that the art would be protected from everyday people like you and me to some extent, okay? But that is not how they exist now, all right? The views that gave rise to these collections, we shouldn't espouse now. But do we destroy the collections? Do we destroy...
Yeah, what are you going to do with it? So no one should look at Da Vinci or anything like that? Because...
No. You should, okay? But you should not go through life believing that Leonardo is the only great artist. Or that he's great because he's Italian, or that he's great because he's a man.
Apparently you shouldn't take a course that covers it, though,
And so anyway, Cotter lists a bunch of ideas that he feels important for museums.
Cotter is who?
An art critic from the Times who is writing this article. And he says, embrace truth, rethink, rewrite history. Come on. History is rewritten every 10 minutes. History is written by the victors, okay? Right. So it never represents the truth. Right. What is the truth?
This is Tamsen talking, not Cotter talking.
This is me talking, yes. Okay? Yeah. So it's our truth right now, okay? And we should embrace it. But I'm not really sure.
I sense...
I don't take responsibility for old, white, rich men who lived 200 years ago and what decisions they made. But I am going to...
even I don't take responsibility for that.
Well, I'm going to use it to my benefit, okay? But anyway, and...
I sense the frustration in your voice, honey. It's pretty clear.
And he says, redefined expert. And he is, embracing the idea that it's not just museum curators who know something about art. It's not just fusty old art historians.
That's not news.
A week ago, we were talking about, even in the Prado, you can learn from the art handlers, the museum guards. I mean, the museum world is already embracing a lot of these ideas. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it's an article worth reading just to get you thinking. Mm-hmm. But, it's really... He says we shouldn't get too caught up in seeing museums as such, political forums. And yet he sort of is.
Yeah, I think people are onto that, too. I mean, okay, it sounds like a New York Times article. But it's talking about rewriting history. HBO, this is about things you might watch, is now running, I think it's over 6 episodes in ORC, which based on The Plot Against America, which is the book by Philip Roth, in which he reimagines history, and how he reimagines it is that Charles Lindbergh, of course, the first man to cross the Atlantic by airplane, the great hero, opposes and prevails over Franklin Roosevelt in an election in the 1940. And
wait a minute.
What?
Lindbergh beat Roosevelt in an election?
Yeah, well, he's reimagining history.
Okay. All right. Wait a minute. What's the name of the book?
Yeah, The Plot Against America.
The Plot Against America.
Right, Philip Roth. And so, that's the book. It's a novel. And based on that scenario that he posits, he wrote this book in 2004, he plays it out. And
so that Lindbergh would be the president.
That's right. And Lindbergh had a history of being anti-Semitic and pro-Germany. And so the way it plays out in history is that instead of opposing Germany in World War II, the U.S. becomes allied with Germany. And you have things happening in the U.S. that happened in Nazi Germany. That's the horrifying thing about it, and that's the premise of the book.
All right, so and this has become a series?
HBO.
On HBO?
Yeah.
Is it out now?
It's out now. It's got a super positive review in the Times.
Do we know who's in it? Is it anybody we would care about?
John Turturro's in it. Who
plays Lindbergh?
That I don't know. They don't tell you that in this article.
Because Lindbergh was like a big, strapping, handsome guy. You and I talked about the book before.
Yeah.
And I had to quibble with this notion of Lindbergh as a hero.
Oh, Lindbergh's definition of hero.
No, I think he was a celebrity.
No, he was a hero. It was a hero.
But he was an awful.
But that doesn't make any difference.
An awful guy.
Doesn't make any difference.
Awful guy.
Doesn't make any difference. He was a hero. You might say that he turned out to be different, but this is in 1927, I believe, when he crossed the Atlantic or so. And it's like I said to you, John Glenn, was a hero. When he came back, they gave a ticker tape parade. It was Hero Goes Down Canyon of Heroes. That's what that is. You become a hero when you go out there and you discover North America, South America, whatever. Vasco da Gama was a hero. So he was a hero. Whether he turned out to be someone who was less than a complete human being is something else. But you could see it's not an implausible plot point. You can see people being swept away by someone who had a heroic following as a hero and was a demagogue besides, and that's what he was.
Well, I think it's one thing to fly an airplane and to be very brave about that.
Right.
It's another thing to, be a moral example or a leader of the free world.
Obviously, but that's the point of the book. Yeah. But you would have voted for Roosevelt.
Listen, I think
Roth is positing that a lot of people would have been carried away with Lindbergh, and he's not wrong.
Most of the time our parents were growing up, Lindbergh was a great hero, and of course he, there's that in our neck of the woods. Yeah. There's the whole story about his son being kidnapped.
Yeah, sure.
And killed.
And that's why that was a big story, because Lindbergh was a hero.
Right.
Yeah.
But then later, when was it, the 70s or 80s, when the memoirs of his wife came out, he was revealed in more depth.
Oh, people have a revisionist view of Lindbergh now. They don't feel the way about him when he landed in the Floyd Bennett Field or something like that. But he was a hero, and it's a plausible thing. Look Times gives the HBO thing a great review. I'm actually not as interested in the HBO thing as the book itself. I'll probably read it. All
right, so get back to me.
I will get back to you. But I'm recommending it to other people. The book, it's sort of shown a light of the book, and people say wonderful things about the book. So I'm a Philip Roth fan, so I think I'll read it. Another thing we lost was the NCAA tournament, and that's sort of old news. But there was one interesting article in the Times about that, and that is that a team that you haven't heard of in basketball prominent circles for a long, long time, the University of Dayton, was one of the top teams in the nation this year, and they were poised to be competitors to win the entire NCAA tournament.
Really?
Yeah. And I remember
poor kids.
When I grew up, University of Dayton was a serious basketball team, and apropos of nothing, the Times writes an article about when the University of Dayton was in the national finals game to win the NCAA against UCLA in 1967.
And you remember every quarter of the game?
No, but I remember seeing Dayton play Madison Square Garden in what was called the ECAC tournament. But in any event, Dayton was a top team. I remember my dad saying to me, Dayton's here. Dayton's a top team. That's when Bradley was a top team. It changes over the years. And but there's an interesting twist on this story. They have a photograph, which I'm going to show you now, and unfortunately we can't show our listeners. That is the tip-off at the beginning of the game. It's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar of UCLA jumping against a fellow named Dan Obrovic of University of Dayton. And as you can see, Dan Obrovic is out-jumping Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and winning the tip.
Well, that's amazing.
It is amazing. And here's what's amazing about this story. That was the only thing Dayton won in the entire game.
Was it because of that guy?
No. I said that was the only thing that Dayton won.
Oh, that was the only thing.
Yes, they lost everything else.
Okay.
UCLA won the game easily.
Yeah.
But that photograph is the most prominent thing in the Dayton, that's displayed in the Dayton trophy case. It's a well-remembered moment in time.
Right.
Of Obrovic.
Was their last moment of glory?
Exactly right. That triumphant tip-off remains, I'm reading from the Times, the most famous photograph in Dayton basketball history. And what happened was, years later, by coincidence, both Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Obravik contracted cancer, different kinds of cancer. Jabbar's was treatable. Obravik's was not. And Kareem Abdul-Jabbar actually, who hadn't really kept up with this guy, he had met him this one time.
Right.
This is many years later. Wrote him a note saying, listen, I heard about your recent battle with cancer. I know you'll find a way to come out on top. My thoughts and prayers are with you. All the best, Kareem. I mean, this is a guy he hadn't had in contact with for 35 years.
Right.
And he enclosed the photograph. Because Kareem knew about it. And, of course...
Well, you never forget when you get beat.
Right. And people asked him. He said... And they interviewed him later. Obravik couldn't even respond. He saw the note. He was touched by it, they say. But he soon, succumbed. Yeah. But they say that Jabbar never lost another tip. Ever. And they asked him what happened. And he said, well, I don't know. I got distracted. And it looks like the tip was a little bit to his side from me. But, the truth is it's better to be gracious than to be competitive. If that meant that nuts to him and it meant that much to Dayton, then that's good. So be it. They won something in that game. He's very gracious about it. And so it's kind of a cute story. And the woman who was living with Obravik when she died by now was, in her late 60s, just was saying she just misses the tournament. And, of course, there's wonderful things to say about Jabbar. So.
Well, I miss the tournament, too.
Yeah.
Because I do jigsaw puzzles. And I'm really falling behind.
Right.
Usually I have a jigsaw puzzle set aside for the tournament. I can be working on that and kind of glancing at the game occasionally and getting the puzzle done. And I, is so that, time spent with the NCAAs on the small screen or whatever we call it is not a total waste of time for me. I'm looking, working on my brain by working on these puzzles.
We can stream some old games.
No, that I think would not engage me as much. So instead we're watching movies and things, and I really sort of have to pay attention, and I can't do my puzzles, so I'm falling behind on the puzzles.
I'll find some movies
because of the lack of NCAAs.
You don't have to pay
also,
attention.
my mother usually watches the games.
Well, that's a whole other story.
And it gives us something to talk about.
Yes.
So, I know this is an article that's not great for a podcast. But
you're going to talk about it anyway.
It's entitled The Inheritance, and it's from the magazine section. Well, not the magazine section. It's from the Design magazine that came with the New York Times this weekend, and it's by Michael Snyder, and the subject is the great furniture maker George Nakashima, whose studio is not far from where we speak. Right. And it actually is a photo essay of two of the houses on his property, the complex where in New Hope, where the furniture was made. He was he was an architect who becomes a furniture crafter maker and makes really beautiful, brilliant furniture. Based on a very hands-on aesthetic, a natural aesthetic, in the New Hope area. And on that site, there are two buildings, the original sort of family homestead, and then a nicer building that he builds, later. Both are being lived in by his children, who are quite, older now, Kevin and, Mira. And so it just details how they live and how these, spaces look. The deal is that Nakashima was a fascinating guy. He was born in Spokane in 1905, and then he will live in New Hope till he dies, I think, in about 1990. And he starts out as an architect. He is trained at MIT, and he works for the termed here Czech-American architect Antonín Raymond, all over the world, Japan, India, etc. But when he comes home and gets married in 1940, I mean, he ends up abandoning architecture in 1941, and shortly after that is interred as a Japanese American in the Minidoka internment camp in Idaho, where actually he ends up, as I understand it, learning the craft of furniture making, and his whole life changes from then on. But isn't it shocking to think of incarcerating an American like that because of their
that's what they did.
nationality? This is something we sort of struggle with in some ways today, but that seems incredibly shocking. Nonetheless, I am just a great fan of his beautiful work, which was...
Well, it's too bad you can't show it. I mean, look, we do see a lot of Nakashima furniture around here, around this area of the country. And it shows up on Antiques Roadshow. Right.
And one of the things that's interesting about his work, and it was handmade, and he believed in this. He was not opposed to machinery as a tool, but opposed to the distance it created between the maker and the design and the production. And, this is very different from modernism in general, where we're embracing mechanization and sort of mass production of work, and yet having a design aesthetic, even though it's mass produced. So, you got to admit, his his furniture looks beautiful in your basic modernist house. Yeah, sure. Okay. But he really... he was a lover of wood, of trees, and would find amazing trees to age and cut and use to create this furniture. His tables often had what's called a free edge. That means it's it has the original contours of the tree itself. So part of the reason the other interesting thing about it is, he did do designs for bigger companies like Knoll, Knoll. All right. So there is that. But outside of those, his work is almost entirely bespoke, entirely made to order, which is interesting how much artwork is going on in the world today that is made to order, commissioned in that manner. So that's interesting to me. Also, it was accessible to not just the super wealthy, okay? Because you remember, our family friends, the Nelsons, actually, bought some, ordered and bought and owned some Nakashima furniture as well. I just wanted to end this rambling on the part of me about just because I love Nakashima with a little thing that when the writer Michael Snyder visits the studio and is looking at the sort of stockpile of fantastic wood that they have there. Mira Nakashima is showing him through, and there are slabs of walnut laid on the concrete floor, their surfaces richly figured. Mira says, when the grain is crazy like this, it means that the tree had an interesting life.
Okay. I don't believe that, but okay.
Lots of us.
What?
Okay.
Yeah.
Are a little crazy.
Yeah.
Due to our interesting lives.
Right. Okay. So. Okay. So just one point before we get to Sondheim, which I do want to talk about for a few minutes, and just very briefly, there's an article about dairy restaurants in Manhattan because there was a book written by a fellow named Ben Catchor called A Dairy Restaurant.
I would actually like to see that book.
All right. Well, maybe we can arrange that. But
I have to say, one side effect of coronavirus, we're really eating well, aren't we?
Yeah. Well, these are not. It's not about recipes, Tamsen. It's about the restaurants and the Jewish people and how they use these restaurants.
We used to go to dairy restaurants in New York City.
I used to go with my father to a place called Farm Food, which was in the 40s on the east side.
And I went with you.
Okay.
Vegetable cutlets at Farm Food.
Now I remember.
That's like a precursor to veggie burgers.
Well, we got to explain what.
But this was back in the 70s.
We haven't explained what a dairy restaurant is. So
explain it.
Okay, so a dairy restaurant is basically no meat, right? So kosher food, you can't eat meat with milk. So if you have a dairy restaurant, there's going to be no meat on the menu. You're going to have things like vegetable cutlets. And you're going to have dishes that do use meat and cheese quite a bit. So you have...
We eat meat, but we have always loved those restaurants.
Right. So we
don't always have to eat.
Let me give some examples of the food. So they have potato knishes, they have borscht, they have cheese kreplach,
blintzes,
kasha varniskas, pierogies, blintzes, buttermilk, pudding, poppy cakes, and farmer's cheese. You don't see farmer's cheese too much anymore.
Oh, I used to love baked farmer's cheese.
Farmer's cheese is one of the great foods. Is it hard to find these days? I don't know. I don't see it.
I don't know if we find it out here.
We used to eat it fairly regularly at home.
It seemed like it used to be a thing that would be in health food restaurants.
Well, in any event.
But now we have healthy food many places. But you know what? Once in a dairy restaurant, I ordered bananas and sour cream.
Yeah.
It was awful.
Was it?
Well, it was just very, 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 very rich.
Oh, okay.
And kind of dry and sweet. But of course now we, bananas with yogurt all the time, and we think it's pretty normal. The funniest experience I had in a dairy restaurant was when I saw on the menu. Oh, it wasn't a dairy restaurant. Was it a dairy restaurant?
I can't tell you.
Stuffed fish.
I think I had that. But okay. I don't know if it was at a dairy restaurant.
It was just a translation of gefilte fish.
Yeah, they have gefilte fish at dairy restaurants.
Okay. So I said to the waiter, it just said stuffed fish. I said, what is the fish stuffed with?
And he said...
And he just looked at me because it's not really a stuffed fish. It's like fish stuffing.
Yeah.
Really. Because it's more like
that's right. Well, they do say...
croquette or something.
He does go to the pains to mention some, I'll say celebrities, loosely phrased, who used to eat at dairy restaurants. One of them is,
Trotsky.
Leon Trotsky, who would not tip. Edward G. Robinson, Franz Kafka. These ate at dairy restaurants in New York. Theodore Bickel, Arthur Miller, Bert Lohr, and Leonard Bernstein. And Frank Zappa, and he mentioned Frank Zappa as tasting gefilte fish for the first time at the dairy restaurant, and he liked it quite a bit. So
what's the most famous Frank Zappa vegetable song?
I don't know. What?
Call any vegetable.
I don't know.
You don't know that song?
No.
Because it has that line in the middle of it, rutabaga, rutabaga.
Listen, I'm talking about farm food. You're talking about Frank Zappa.
I know you don't want to talk about this more, but
I don't.
Trotsky got in trouble for not tipping well.
I know, the waiters
They gave him terrible service.
Yes, well, he deserved it.
But I forget, he had some stupid reason for not tipping.
Because he thought it was anti-worker. It didn't give them the proper respect.
Oh, so it's like Danny Meyer's restaurants.
Yeah.
They should get a higher hourly wage, not tips.
Right.
Maybe he felt that way, but maybe he was just really cheap.
It's possible. So, in any event, let's talk about Sondheim. So, it's Sondheim's birthday. You knew the day. I didn't know the day.
Today.
Is it today?
I think it's today.
Yeah, okay.
But I'm not losing sleep over it.
Okay. Well,
it's his birthday week. We know that.
Yes. Well, the thing about Sondheim is there was a huge tribute in last Sunday's Times. All kinds of articles about it. And there were all kinds of performances scheduled to commemorate his birthday, which have been canceled, including the production of Assassins, which is postponed from Classic Stage Company, which is attracting quite a bit of attention. But in any event, the article that stuck out to me, and there were many in the Times, was by Jesse Green. And his thesis about Sondheim is this. He literally says Sondheim is under-acknowledged. You see all these tributes, it's not enough. Nothing's near enough. He's not just, according to Jesse Green, the greatest writer of songs for musicals, or as he puts it, the greatest composer-lyricist the U.S. has ever produced. And I think that's pretty much accepted at this point. But that's not it. He claims that Sondheim is a great playwright. and he doesn't get credit for being a playwright. And that is what makes him unique. And that's an interesting thought. And the reason that Jesse Green justifies that is that he says that the songs themselves have a certain dramatic tension and do as much as any amount of dialogue can do in a play to actually enrich the experience. They're filled with nuance. They're filled with ambiguity. And he's a playwright. And yet I remembered from Sondheim's books that Sondheim does not fancy himself a playwright. And let me just pause for a second. What I mean by Sondheim's books. Again, people looking for something to read. There are two books that Sondheim himself wrote, which are called Finishing the Hat and Look, I Made a Hat, which are his own analyses of his own musicals, in particular the lyrics that he wrote for his own musicals. And they are fantastic.
They are fascinating. But let's just take a step back.
Yes.
Okay? Because we have some loyal listeners who are not that familiar with Sondheim.
Right.
You want to just mention some of the musicals?
Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. Well, he did the lyrics for West Side Story. He wrote Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. He did the lyrics for Gypsy. He wrote Company. That's music and lyrics. Everything else, music and lyrics. Follies. A little night music. I don't want to miss anything. Pacific Overture, Sweeney Todd. Merrily We Roll Along. Sunday in the Park with George. Into the Woods. Assassins. Passion.
Okay. So some of these, pretty much anyone who's been to a musical might be familiar with.
Right.
But some you may not be familiar with. And I have to say, growing up, I never heard of Sondheim.
Oh, okay.
I was completely unaware.
Right. And
for a while, for a long time, I was very snooty about Sondheim.
How so?
I said, like Rodgers and Hart appealed to me.
Right.
Okay. And the truth is I was just ignorant. I was stupid. Because, and Jesse Green kind of covers that in a way.
Yeah, he does.
And he says that when you really listen to Sondheim, his lyrics really reflect how we think, and look at life today in a way like no other.
Right.
And that's true, that ambiguity, that tension that he creates between, your life, your dreams, your loves, etc.
Beneath the surface, really, the real things that people respect, the real stuff of life.
And Sondheim can create a sense of poignance in me that no other musical can do.
Right.
So the older I get, the more I just adore Sondheim and feel that his work speaks to me.
Well, that's interesting, and I agree with that.
But you were onto it before I was.
Well, I grew up in New York. I'm a Jewish person from New York. It comes with the territory.
Sondheim is from Doylestown, not far from Limeport.
Yeah, but the New York Musical Theater, as they like to say, they call the New York music audience the 900 Jews. So they're somehow, that's what Mike Nichols used to call it. Yeah, I have a theater of 900 Jews. So, but in any event, well, I'm glad that you became such a convert. And what Sondheim explains in his book, Finishing the Hat, anticipating perhaps Jesse Green, or obviously Jesse Green hasn't read this, and I'm not going to read it now because it's just too long, but he writes beautifully. He says, he's not a playwright, but what he's writing are playlets. And here's what he means. He said a playwright can hold your attention for 2.5 hours. And there's a certain spacing and flow to that, and pace to that, and rhythm to that. And he's never mastered that. What he's writing in songs are playlets. He says he can hold people's attention for a short period of time and engage them in a way a playwright does. Because as he says, he does see himself. He says, I am by nature a playwright, but I can't write plays. This is literally what he says. But I can write playlets and try to convey the kind of things a playwright does in 2.5 minutes, in 3.5 minutes, in 4 minutes, in duets, in combination of 3 or 4 singers at the same time. That's what I can do. And that's what Jesse Green is responding to. And that's what makes the song so moving. It's like And he does mention Rodgers and Hart. It's like, you might say, oh, he's very clever in the way that Lorenz Hart was clever. He's that guy sitting in the corner of the party. He's got this quip. He's got that remark. They're cute, they're clever, they're funny. That's not what Sondheim's doing. Sondheim is getting beneath the surface of the character, conveying something important about the way we live in a 4-minute song. And that's what he's doing. And that's what he's great at. So the example, they actually asked people, performers, their favorite songs. And Melissa Errico actually responded with one that increasingly, in my mind, is a song which plays in my head, which is from Into the Woods, which is the song No More. And I'll just give this as a sample, and then we'll close. But the scene is the baker, and Into the Woods is a fairy tale in the first act. And if you see a high school production, you see the first act and nothing else. And the second act is more serious, and it's the consequences of the people's actions in the first act. And it's
more like real life.
More like real life. And so this is deep in the second act. And the baker has now suffered a
series of losses.
A series of losses, including loss of his wife. And there is a giant rampaging in the land. And he has a child, but he feels he can't even protect the child. And he's ready to give up like his father did. And just basically run away. And in this song, which he sings with his father, this is what he says in his despair. I'll just read a few lines, but without the music, obviously. He's giving up. No more giants waging war. Can't we just pursue our lives with our children and our wives till that happier day arrives? How do you ignore all the witches, all the curses, all the wolves, all the lies, the false hopes, the goodbyes, the reverses, all the wondering what even worse is still in store? All the children, all the giants, no more. And what does his father say? He says, running away, go to it. Where did you have in mind? Have to take care unless there's a where, you'll only be wandering blind. Just more questions, different kind. And that's in one song.
Right.
So, Sondheim's
So happy
great.
Birthday, Sondheim.
Happy birthday, Sondheim. And
neighbor.
That's right, neighbor.
We love you.
We'll see you next week.
Yes, Tamsen and Dan reading the paper.
Yes.